All right.
Hello,
Morning.
everyone, and welcome to The Right Data, The Right Time. I'm Penny Ciavieri, the founder of PLC Associates and also Senior Vice President of our division at Scaleris Learning. And I'm so glad to have with me today my colleague, and I have to say great friend, Emery Rothel.
Good morning.
Emery is our Senior Director of Operations. But what you really need to know beyond that is he has amazing expertise, deep expertise, working with our PLC clients and leading them through various kinds of change initiatives. So we're very glad to be able to share with you some of our insights today around the importance of, you'll hear throughout our presentation, the status check. So with that, Emery.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And Penny, thank you for bringing me in on this conversation this morning. Penny and I always have conversations around improvement. So we are very happy to just share our knowledge and our experience with all of you this morning. So we're going to get right into it. Penny and I, we just love getting right into things. So here's our first question that we want to talk about this morning is, are we actually truly achieving implementation impact? So we're going to take a moment here to talk about what is implementation impact and what does that mean to Penny and myself, excuse me, with the districts, the clients that we work with. So the first thing that we know is districts are very complex. There's multiple levels, there's multiple layers to how we run our school districts. And as a result, there's multiple structures, there's multiple practices, and there's lots of systems. So what we want to do is kind of take that 30,000-foot view here to talk about how do we describe our implementation impact.
And Emery, as we're mentioning these kinds of things, and as you're thinking about all of the plans that you have in place in your district or various schools, if implementation impact isn't a concept, please name it and claim it. Make it a concept, because those two words together, I think, are very, very compelling. Not only are we going to be executing with fidelity, but as we do that, we're expecting that there's going to be results, and obviously there's an impact. Otherwise, what would be the reason for all of our great district and school-based plans? So make it a concept.
Absolutely. Thank you, Penny. And I think Penny's right. We always talk about implementing, but really what's the true background around what does true implementation look like? So we actually have two parts to the system. The first is we do really well with designing targeted plans. I think as organizations, as districts, as schools, even in our classrooms, we tend to design very well to achieve specific goals. But the thing that we tend to lose focus on is the whole systems-based approach. So that's the first part I want to walk us through, because this will set us up for really the focus of our conversation this morning, which is our components of a status check and why that's so important. So the first thing is we talk about implement. But when we implement, we have to make sure that the implementation has a plan around it. What I mean by that is the plan involves some research-based, some very proven practices. You need credibility around your implementation. The second is we have to ensure that we provide the right training. And then throughout our training, and after our training, as we are implementing, we have to ensure that calibration is happening. Calibration is a huge piece. Penny, you and I have done learning walks so many times with leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that we truly try to understand is our calibration of that learning walk, because we have to ensure that we're looking at the right things, we're looking at it the same way, and then we have conversation around it. The second then is monitoring it. So one thing is to implement it. What I always say is you have to inspect what you expect. If you're not inspecting those things, and that's at any level within an organization, then we truly don't know what is happening. So that second thing is that monitoring piece. We have to clearly define who's involved with monitoring. How will they be involved with monitoring? And then the what. There's actually two parts to our what here. The first thing is, what are we looking for? As well as what would those outcomes and what should it be what should it look like? So if those aren't happening, then we don't really have a true monitoring practice. The other part is then, where does all that data live? I mean, that's another thing. Do we live in a very heavy spreadsheet after spreadsheet environment, or do we truly have a central dashboard for which we can review those results? And that's the second part here. So if we're implementing well, we have clear calibration and we are monitoring this. The next part is, how and when are we reviewing it? How many times, Penny, have you and I talked about data rich, action poor, right? We talk about that all the time. I don't know if you have a story around that, but I know several times when I go with districts, yeah, we have all this great data. But the thing is, we don't have a system and a practice to review those results so that we cannot determine what I talk with districts around. Are we on schedule or are we not on schedule? Because if we're on schedule, then we know that our impact of implementation is happening. If we're not on schedule, then we have to make those adjustments. So that's our last piece here. Do we course correct? So if we are monitoring well and we're able to review the results, we can actually answer these questions. Where should we course correct? We can use our data to leverage that course correction. How will we course correct? By having our data and having our systems in place, we then have more credibility and more confidence in how we're going to course correct. And then the last is, what then will we expect? Because part of the expectation is through our targeted plan, but even our targeted plans will shift over time. The other part is, if we're on schedule, or even if we're not on schedule, but if we are on schedule, where do we ramp things up? Just because we're achieving success doesn't mean we put the pause on and just plateau. Where do we now ramp it up? How do we do that? And what do we expect to happen from that result?
And Emery, you make such a good point as we're going on to our next slides here. And this was just a great overview of the implementation model that we utilize. We need to have protected time and space. So colleagues, think about that. We have all kinds of structures in place, right? We have our faculty meetings, we have our grade level meetings, maybe you have professional learning communities, we have our school-based team, we have our student support services, we probably have something like a curriculum council. So the fact that those structures are already set up, it's very easy to connect in the status check with those particular groups. It's not like we have to add, a plethora of all kinds of extra meetings, which no one really likes or appreciates. So components, Emery, of a status check?
All right. So the first thing we have to set out is, why are we having status checks? And I think in the prior slide, we just demonstrated why it's so important to have status checks. We have to ensure that the implementation is happening, that calibration is happening, that we're monitoring, we're reviewing the results in a team-based format, and we're adjusting, and we agree to those adjustments. That's another part to status checks, is there has to be agreeance and coherence around that. If that's not happening, then it really is harder to fulfill that system to ensure that we're focused on that targeted plan. The next part is, like, who's involved? Who really should be involved? A lot of times when I work with districts, I'm always working on multiple levels. I work with teachers at like that professional learning community level. I work with grade levels. I work with content areas. We are constantly spinning that targeted plan through their lenses. We then take that targeted plan and I work with building leaders around it. So again, more people are involved. Why? Because if you go back to that first slide that I talked about, it's communication, communication, communication. The more clear you are with it and the more people understand how they are a part of it, the more your system is going to work in that flywheel approach. And then what data or information is included? Those are key pieces. We have to agree upon what data will actually help us and what's some data that unfortunately may not really need to be there, because sometimes too much data can really murky the water. I know, Penny, when you and I were talking about this morning, you want to talk a little bit more. So I'm going to let you bring in some of that data piece here, because you really have lived your life in that data world.
That's great. So I think if we go to the next slide.
Okay. Oh, we're not there yet. Sorry. I was just going to have you do some data parts here, but I'm sorry. I was just going to have you add the little piece of data. Penny does have a great piece of data, so we'll get to that. Sorry. The other part is, like, we talk about how long is the process. I don't think status checks need to last very long. I think what we need to do is, with status checks, we build a template, we build a brief agenda for it. if we are truly focused on that targeted plan and we have those systems in place, the process itself should not last very long. Why? Because people want to get in, we want to focus on a few questions, we want to figure out our next steps, and then do that work. I think sometimes if we prolong the process, we actually start to chew too much, and then we can't take those bite-sized chunks to make those actions adjust. We can't really take hold of those actions. Think about making change at a 1% level than a 50% level. You're going to make more change by doing small bites of 1% versus like 50% at a time. And then what are those actions or follow-ups? Like, what should those results be? Like, what would we expect? So it all goes back to that systems approach. And I just want to bring in real quickly, because I think some of you might be curious, like, well, what does a status check look like? So here's one that PLC uses. This is our quarterly status check. We think it's very important that we're always having time to meet with our central contacts in our districts. And this is the report page that we use. This is a template, but it's a very basic template, but it's a very powerful template because it does a couple things. One, it obviously adds in all the people that we want in attendance and who are a part of it. But what we do is each associate has their own portion, and we focus on specific areas of our work. Why is that important? Because at the beginning of all of our projects and our work with districts, whether it's in school improvement, Foundational 5, our leverage leadership systems, we want to present our 3 to 5 outcomes, and that becomes our areas of focus so that we are specifically supporting their targeted plan. What we then like to do is provide our brief overview of what happened on-site and virtual work. We think that's very important because that's our reflection. And then from our conversation around our work, we help the district understand our next steps and why we're choosing those next steps. So this is just an example of what our status check format looks like. And this really could be adapted in many, you can use this in many formats at different levels in a school organization. All right.
And what I really like about this, Emery, the way that PLC does status checks with our various clients is it's co-accountability and co-constructing. We know from Fullen's research, I'm a big fan of Michael Fullen, as probably you know from some of our videos. Our clients appreciate this because when we're on site, we're able to help facilitate, pull in, as Emery is saying, the right data, and then always have as a deliverable follow-up actions so that we're proactively knowing exactly precisely where we are with our school-based or district plans. Sometimes it doesn't go smoothly, right? And we need to accept the fact that there are challenges. Better to know the challenges as you go through the academic year so we're able to put in place, follow-up actions and get right back to tight on track.
Absolutely.
So maybe we could go to the concentric circles. I think that's the
Sure.
information I was
Yep.
looking to get to.
That's what we're going to do. I just, this is our quick reflective point here. Just take note. I think as Penny was also just kind of presenting her thoughts on this process, take note now of how the systems approach is all based within what you see on that left-hand side. So Penny, your concentric circles. I always love hearing how you talk about this. You always teach me something new about the thinking around this.
Well, thank you.
I'm interested
And I love talking about concentric circles
I
for
know you do.
sure. Just
All
tee it
right.
up and I'm ready to go on concentric circles.
All
Okay,
you.
so folks, this is a great schematic or template, and I'd like you to be reflecting now of the information that you collect in your district and the data points that you have in place. The case that I want to make here loud and clear is it must be more than looking just at student achievement, because if we do that is central. That is one of the most important components. But there are other layers of circles that wrap around supporting the students. And the reason, the why that you would do that is we want to have all of our habits of practice and all of our strategies locked in, right, to a culture in an organization so that we can self-sustain. And unless you deal with these other layers and have metrics to support, yes, indeed, leadership is moving in the right direction, teacher practices, our school structures, and then the all-important climate will lose those results perpetuating over time. So what do we look at? students at the center. We all know about exit tickets, unit exam information, our common formative assessments that happen at certain points throughout the year. Middle school, high school, we're probably looking more at course passing, behavioral data, certainly as part of your MPSS. So that's the student component. The next question is, who's supporting the students? And we can use the everybody lean in model here. That would include teacher practices. So what about your professional learning? One of my favorite questions to ask districts is, does your professional learning make a difference? Does it translate into classroom practices? And if it does it show up in terms of implementation impact, as Emery talked about earlier, with student results? Curriculum, learning walks. PLC Associates loves to take teachers on teacher-led learning walks because we're able to visit those classroom practices that we're putting in place and our new strategies, and have the teachers comment and talk about the extent to which this is taking hold. I so trust our teachers to do this kind of work and make those assessments. We want to hear from them because they have that critical lens around how well are we implementing. Leadership, next level, who's supporting the teachers? We have something called our Leverage Leadership Inventory, 25 competencies that every leader must look at if we're going to be, an effective instructional leader. What about our walkthroughs? That walkthrough data, where does it go? I mean, we think at PLC, it should go back to a faculty meeting. It's all anonymous information. It's not personally identifiable. We're not naming teachers, but you will see in a later slide, we're able to identify, let's say we're working on higher order questions or wait time, the extent to which we feel, and we're discussing at that faculty meeting, this is in place. And then you've probably all heard about our data triangle, which is a great measurement of infrastructure and school culture. You'll see Rochester City School District there. I just put that hyperlink in and you can click on it later after you're watching the presentation again, maybe. And that's a position paper on common formative assessments that I thought was really well done. So Emery, I think we can skip by the next slide because I've basically covered this. And look at this information. Now, this is part of our Foundational 5. That's one of our PLE signature programs that's taken 5 areas and developed about 20 different modules that relate to student agency, student engagement, complex questioning. You see the whole information right there in the histogram. This is real data from one of our districts in New York. Look where they started in September and then where they ended up. Do they have implementation impact? Absolutely. And why do I like this information? Because as we're looking at concentric circles, this hones in on teacher practices, right? Classroom level. And it also connects from a leadership perspective, what are leaders seeing as they're visiting classrooms? Now, if you really want to get energy going in your district or school, post these kinds of results. It's quantifiable, it's measurable, it's objective, and nothing really revs up a school more than to know, yes, what we planned is working. Emery?
All right. Okay, so Penny, you just laid out all of these various practices, everything from, and really it's how we focus on the student. I work with several districts on MTSS, and MTSS, if you really take those concentric circles, Penny, that MTSS practice lives there. The other part that I work on with MTSS, though, is that systems implementation piece. And I think that that's a critical piece to our next set of questions here. And, we have to take inventory. So as we're talking about this, think about your own inventory of your district based on the level of where you serve it in your roles. If you are a central office person, think about this. How many different data points are we trying to collect and in some ways trying to use? Even at a school level, how many data points are we collecting and how are we trying to use those? A lot of times when I work with districts, Penny, the thing I notice is elementary schools tend to be very heavy in data. They have lots of data points. And I think it's because of the types of assessments, the battery of various assessments that we are using for our young learners, because we are trying, that's the first time in a child's life where we're starting to get academic and social emotional learning based data. What ends up happening is, I think, as you go up in your years in middle school and high school, we actually become very few, you have less data points. So one of the things I work on with districts is to rethink that. Let's look at the elementary level. If we have too many, where do we start to scale that back so that we find the data points that give us multiple points of information? In high schools, I was on actually with a high school yesterday, and I asked them, what's your universal screener? They don't have one. So for me, that's already thinking, great, you might have a plan around MTSS or RTI. However, there's no way to feed it. Like, how do we make then decisions around it? So that's the other part. So again, it goes like into number 2 here. Do we actually have data points for concentric circles? So what I just kind of pointed out was elementary schools tend to have multiple data points within those concentric circles. I think they have a lot of data points. Sometimes we have to take a look at it, and I say literally throw it up against the wall. Let's see what we currently have. Are we using them the ways in which we originally thought of using them? Sometimes, Penny, you've seen this with districts, they have assessments just to have assessments. And I think sometimes it's for the sake of, because they feel like, well, we need this. But if we're not doing anything beyond with the data, it starts to become kind of a point of contention. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're over assessing kids. Well, we might not be over assessing students if we're truly using the data in the right way. Whereas data points for secondary schools, you might not have all the data points like what we just laid out in those concentric circles. So Penny, the other part though is, I know that data requires scheduled time. All right. So I know you've had multiple touch points throughout your career with various districts. Talk about intentional practices around that, because we know that those assessment periods and having a scheduled time frame is critical really for ensuring that we implement with high impact.
You're right. And our most successful districts and schools, it's point number 4 here, benefit from a closed loop system. And we talked about this earlier. It must be a closed loop. And what do we mean by that? That the information is going somewhere, it's talked about, we synthesize it, and then we decide, what is it that we're going to do as a follow-up action. And far too often, when we first start working with new clients, we see, yes, you've done a great job with your common formative assessments, and you are at the middle school and high school level looking at course passing and credits that are being accumulated on the path to graduation. But it's not a consistent, quote unquote, habit of practice, and doesn't come all the way around. So I think the charge that we have, each of us, is whatever information we're collecting vis-a-vis concentric circles, and please do think about going beyond just student indices, but the other aspects of our system. If it's not about, and as Emery has protected time, and we're taking, maybe we talk a little bit in PLC Associates about micro moves. It's another great concept. Coming out of your status check, what are the micro moves or adjustments that we have to make, knowing what we know now based upon the data? So closed loop systems are critical.
All right.
So the next slide.
Yep. Let's go on to our next slide here. So let's kind of summarize where we are right now. So the plan is only the beginning. All right. So we talked about, that's the first thing. We're really good at creating targeted plans. Again, though, having that systems-based approach where there is clear communication, understanding, we've calibrated that system. We are experimenting with that system sometimes. And that's another part I haven't pointed out. We start to approach, implementing plans in a targeted way using a system that might be, it works well from the beginning. But if you notice in our systems check throughout. So we have our status checks and the multiple points in which we're checking in on the system. What that also does is it helps to improve the impact of that system, right, Penny? So if we know that, hey, we started out with this data set, but over time, that data set's not actually the set of data that we hoped it would be, we would be able to utilize well, then we have to make a choice to maybe change that, or we need to look at that data from a new angle. I like this, Penny, I'm a scientist by nature here, so I really like studying systems. I always ask really sometimes some critically weird questions, but I think it's because it gets at some of this loop closing and ensuring that we're focused on the right things. So, I'm just going to read this off, but we truly do want to design and execute a comprehensive process. So Penny, you've talked about the concentric circles. That's a huge part of this quantitative and qualitative measurement portion. We want to use this model and always point back to it. I think that model, Penny, is a great way to communicate the who's involved, why are we involved, how are we all involved, what would all this look like? Maybe lay that out there and have people do Post-it notes. What would it look like if this was truly happening? And then you kind of do that like understanding by design. If we want to design our system that way, what would it look like in a backwards process to make that happen? I think that's a critical,
Emery,
a new way to think about
here.
it.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you there.
Go
but
for
we
it.
do that all the time.
Yeah, I know.
What I'm thinking through as you're describing this whole thing, for our colleagues, taking this information, take it back to your leadership team and talking about a great drill to go through, put up those concentric circles and say, okay, in each one of these areas, what data points do we have available? Where do we have gaps? What do we want to look at so that we do cement all these practices into our system? And the beauty of that is you'll be able to design your own very effective, very targeted, specific to your school and your district series of status checks. On the next slide, you're going to see what PLC Associates does intentionally with all of our clients. This is a regular part of how we operate with our schools and our district. So we start with the comprehensive diagnostics, and we're looking at the current state. Obviously, the challenges and the successes, all of what structures do you have in place? Because structures could be in place, but the practices within the structures are not effective. An example might be, oh yeah, we have data cycles and we do this 6 times a year, every, so many weeks. But as we have been commenting throughout, is anyone looking at the information? No, not necessarily. So the next piece is, and notice the design of the plan. We take school-based and district plans very, very seriously. I think sometimes, unfortunately, organizations look at this as, well, we've got to do a plan. So somewhere around the last week of August, we throw something together very casually, but it's not really with the belief that this is going to be a driving force that's going to propel us through the academic year. So making sure with our plans, we have clear success criteria. What does that mean? At the end of this implementation period, what are the outcomes? 3 to 5, we go with 3 to 5 outcomes that will absolutely be in place, and we'll be able to recognize both quantitatively, and Emery made the point earlier in the last slide, qualitatively. Qualitative information is valid. That's commentary, that's anecdotal information, in addition to the quantifiable. This next box, so critical. I'm sure you've all heard fidelity of implementation. And that means exactly as it sounds, that we are going to be judicious. We have a tremendous responsibility, that is PLC, in working with our districts to hold everybody, in a very nice ways, of course, collaborative ways, ourselves included, to delivering as we promised. And then, of course, monitoring those results, and the process then just continue. So what I want you to know, if we're not doing status checks in our organization, please start and construct them with a belief system and meaning this is going to be a critical part of how we operate. And even if we're not working with your district or your school right now, we do have many clients who are having us come in and do just this part. So we'll take your plans, your strategies, your goals, your outcomes, and layer in a co-accountability, very collaborative kind of fashion, these constructs so that we never go back to the situation when we say, oh yeah, we had a plan. Did it work? Who knows? Not really. This is a game changer for implementation impact.
All right. So we always like to end with a reflection. So let's, take a moment and just reflect on some of the information. What stood out to you? What were some of the things that you were thinking about your own organization as Penny was presenting and I was providing some kind of insight and just thought around the ways in which we think about high impact of implementation and how are we checking that throughout the system? Again, I think what Penny, you were really pointing out is checking your system should not be happening just once. Think about this. I thought about this morning. Our cars today are always checking the multiple systems, right? If your car only checked your system as you started it and never checked it as you drove, you could be stuck somewhere, right? So our cars always have systems checks happening at all times. Penny, I think you just demonstrated it, that we need to have those concentric circles. We have to have an understanding that multiple points of checking in are very important to ensure that our system is always running in the manner in which we've designed for it. If it's not running in the ways that we've designed for it, then we have to figure out why it's not running that way, and then put in the pieces to improve that portion of it. So with that, take a look just for a moment and just think about where might we currently be in our organization? Are we at a level 1, or are we truly running at a level 5? And then based on your choice of level, think about for a moment, what do you think you might need to do next to get it to that next level? Okay, so even if you're at a level 5, you have to ensure that you're always thinking the next step.
And my last comment here, great nomenclature again, strategic abandonment. What does that mean? If in your research and looking at status checks and the data that you're collecting, if there is any information that's difficult to collect and it's not really usable, and we've just been doing this, over time, but it's not a predictive data point, meaning giving us information that we need to take action, goodbye, strategically abandoned, because we only have so much time, energy, and focus. So we want to be able to dial in on the critical things. Emery, thank you. This was great having a discussion today. Please take these slides and we encourage you to work with your leadership team. You'll see this last page here on October 17th. This will be the next in the series. If you take a look at the registration, I'll be having a discussion with some top national thought leaders on all things improvement. So we hope to see you there. And with that, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Thanks, Emery.
Lunchtime. Thanks,
Thank you.
Penny.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.